Did it get easier? Oh, man. I'm listening.
Okay, we are starting a new chapter and new person today, which is the character of Rehoboam, which is Solomon's son and Solomon's choice to be the next king and that kind of thing. And to be honest, Rehoboam is really not a winner. So anyway, but there is things that we can learn from Rehoboam's life, as opposed to just looking at the kind of the disaster that he left and sort of promoted and that kind of thing, because it was under him that the kingdom divides. So, but we have to realize that God is in control of all these things, and this happens as a result of a prophecy that was given to a man called Jeroboam. Sorry. I know it's the coconut. It's getting stuck in my ear. Yeah, if I start turning red or start turning blue, you know. Yeah. So,
sorry, but I know my.
Okay, that's good. No reality. Just punch me in the chest, you know. Or give me the Heimlich or whatever. We can be praying for Ailish too. Ailish is not going to be coming on Zoom for the next foreseeable future, because she has to go and sit with her 96-year-old mother, who's really losing weight and not doing well. So I'm going to pray for her at the end here. So, but
she's really worried about her solution.
oh, I know. So yeah. So she was texting me there the other day. So anyway, right. So here we go. Okay, so now we have to look at some of these verses here in chapter 10, which is where we're going to sit now. There's a fair amount of stuff that's dedicated really to Jeroboam, or not Jeroboam, sorry, Rehoboam, which is chapter 10, 11, and 12. And then subsequent chapters then tend to be like a chapter piece for the various kings, unless there's something really sort of significant happening, such as like Hezekiah. There's quite a lot of material that's dedicated to him, and Josiah, and so on. You know, these particular men who were very, very good kings sort of warrant, you know, more discussion. And so, but some of the other kings, you know, handful of verses, and you know, even though they might have reigned for a good long time, you know, just didn't have much spiritual sort of input. So, but there are things we can learn in regard to yeah, you get these things mixed up, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. So you're confused. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we're talking about Rehoboam. Okay. So right, let me get. So we're looking at 2 Chronicles 10, the first. And I want to get all these verses up and read them to you. So anyway, we'll get these verses up. It says, and Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem, and Shechem, incidentally, is north of Jerusalem. It's out in the hills, out in the countryside. So he goes there in order to get crowned king. All right. So to make him king, verse 2, and so it happened when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard it. He was in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, that Jeroboam returned from Egypt. Now that whole discussion is from 1 Kings chapter 11, I think it is, about what happened with Jeroboam. And but in Chronicles, there's not any discussion, or there's very little discussion about him, because again, the emphasis is what God is doing with Judah and the line of the Messiah and that kind of thing. So, because it's under Jeroboam that the northern tribes then go away, sin, commit adultery, and all kinds of things, and then eventually they get taken into captivity quite early compared to the rest of them. Okay, so verse 3, and then they sent for him and called him, and Jeroboam and all Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father and its heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So he said to them, come back to me after 3 days, and the people departed. And then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived, saying, how do you advise me to answer these people? And they spoke to him, saying, if you are kind to these people and please them and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. Next set of verses here. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he said to them, what advice do you give? How should we answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us? And then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, thus you shall speak to the people who have spoken to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips, but I will chasten you with scourges. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, as the king had directed, saying, come back to me the 3rd day. And then the king answered them roughly. And King Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders, and he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to it. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges. And so the king did not listen to the people, for the term of events was from God, as the Lord might fulfill his word, which he had spoken by the hand of Ahijah, the Shilonite, to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Okay, so now you can probably gather from that Rehoboam is obviously making a decision here. And so Jeroboam, who's not a good guy, okay, he's not a good man. There's probably ulterior motives with him and that kind of thing, but nonetheless, him and the rest of Israel are coming and saying, look, the yoke that Solomon has put on us has been heavy. Please lighten it. Now, sometimes we hear that kind of language and we go, well, what is a yoke? What is this thing that's so heavy? When we think about a yoke, we talked about a yoke a few things ago, and the yoke is a thing that sits on two oxen, and so, but obviously that is a symbolic of tax. Okay, the yoke is taxes. Okay, so in order for Solomon to amass as much wealth as he had, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from taxing the people and taxing, getting tribute, as they called it, from surrounding nations and that kind of stuff. So, so I would think, early on in Solomon's career, everybody loved him. He was a spiritual man. He was a kind man, and we know that from the Queen of Sheba, because the Queen of Sheba says, your servants are happy. Okay, but then Solomon starts to go a bit pear-shaped, getting loads of foreign women, taxing people in order to amass wealth to himself, getting horses, all these different things that God told Moses back in Deuteronomy 17 that man shouldn't be doing. And so the people were very, very weighed down, with taxation, and taxation has been a problem forever. Governments need to tax people in order for government to function. But we all know what it's like to say, you know, I don't like tax. Does anybody here like giving the government money? No, we certainly like taking money from the government, you know, in certain circumstances, or we prefer, you know, them leaving us alone and that kind of thing. And in the American Revolution of the late 18th century, you know, with George Washington and them sort of people, 1776 was our, you know, July 4th was our Day of Independence and all this kind of stuff. But you know, the reason that all really kicked off was because there was this issue of taxation without representation. So, so the American colonies under England were being taxed, but they had no representation in Parliament. So, and so that really kicked off a lot of problems. You know, so you know, there's an issue in our own day and age. You know, there's all the issues of taxes. You know, and because of COVID and all that kind of stuff, guess what? They're going to raise taxes in order to go and pay for, you know, Rishi Sunak's whole, you know, stuff with the NH, you know, which we understand. You know, but somebody's got to ante up and pay for it, and inevitably somebody's going to be lining their pockets with something as well. You know, so that is what is happening. And so Jeroboam and all his group is, you know, basically saying, look, if you sort of give us a bit of a break here, we'll serve you, and and everything will be grand. But Jeroboam has Rehoboam goes to the older guys who are then were under Solomon and were wise men, knew the crack and all that sort of stuff. And they said, look, you know, we know what it was like back then, how heavy and difficult it was. If you're nice to people, people will be nice to you. It's nice to be nice, you know, so let's ease this down. So, but then Rehoboam goes to his mates, and you have to realize that Rehoboam is not a young guy at this particular stage. He's 41. So he's not just an 18-year-old or something. But I would think, and this is what I've read, is basically his mates are saying, look, go and tax the people even more, because actually we're sitting in nice jobs. You know, we're working in the government, and we don't, if you drop the tax base, then that means certain activities within government don't get funded, and that means we'll lose our jobs. So, and this is why Rehoboam is going, oh, but you know, they're my mates, so they're saying, you know, and you know, we want to keep, you know, the cronies happy, you know, kind of stuff. You know, so really it has much to do about taxation. You know, so but Rehoboam is more concerned about pleasing certain elements within his group than doing what is more expedient and right for the nation. So anyway, so let's look at a few notes about Rehoboam. He was 41 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 17 years. So so that means that if you add those two numbers together, so he was 58 when he died. So not terribly old. No, you know, so some of us aren't far off of 58, and then there's others of us that have gone way beyond that. But he was born a year before Solomon took over as king. So, you know, it's important to sort of look at the numbers here and sort of then kind of calculate, okay, well, you know, when was he born? You know, and where and what was he in regard to where Solomon, his father, was, and so on. So when he was born, Solomon actually wasn't king yet. Yes, David was. Yeah. So So he saw the development of Solomon's style of leadership, along with the consequences of good and bad decisions. So he saw the whole thing. He saw the entirety of his father's reign. You know, it wasn't like he was born sort of 20 years into it or something like that. And but he, he saw the good spiritual buildup and how God, had come by his glory into the temple. Rehoboam would have seen all that, and but he also then saw how Solomon was making a dog's dinner of his life, and bringing woman into the thing. And you'd have to have a seriously big house in order to deal with 700 wives and 300 mistresses. That's wild altogether. So can't imagine. I mean, you don't have a house there, man. You have a like a city. Yeah. So Solomon and his women. So anyway, I remember when I used to have the Bible study. Were you here when we had it in the old kitchen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you remember them days? And it was just all women.
Yeah.
There was not a single man about the place except when, except when Martin finally showed up. And so anyway, praise God for Martin. But anyway, so that's not to compare anything about me and Solomon. But anyway, suffice to say, Rehoboam as a son, saw an awful lot of what his father was doing, both good and bad.
So sorry, was God not in his heart? Did he not? Because why didn't he ask God for guidance? Because he watched.
Well, I think he probably saw Solomon, in the early years of how he did trust God, wrote the book of Proverbs, and all these sorts of things. But yet he then, it was probably not long after the building of the temple and the building of his palace and all that kind of stuff, that then things started to go downhill. So that would have meant that he was, 20, 25, early 20s. And so him being, a late teen, getting into his 20s, thinking he has a few oats to sow and all this kind of stuff, and then seeing his dad go buck mad, that way, he's going, well, okay, I guess that's legitimate. Because with parents and kids, it's monkey see, monkey do. So, and that's how it goes. So, the child will look at what the parents are doing and they'll go, I guess that's a legitimate way of proceeding forward in life. Even though they may see bad consequences of it, they'll still surmise, but they're making a decision and that's okay for them. So, so Rehoboam didn't have a great poster boy for good parental upbringing. So I mean, I would be confused. Shucks, if I had a father who had 700 wives, I would be going, who's mom? Yeah. What do I listen to her? Do I listen to her? Is she turning me up, or she puts the crack? So, but anyway, so I'd be confused with that. I would be confused with spiritual messages. Where Solomon is saying, yes, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord. You see that 16 different times in the book of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord, and then it's a nonsense.
It's hard to believe that.
Yeah.
That man wrote that.
Yeah.
And then slid down to afterwards.
Did he write it first then? Yeah.
And then Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. Now Ecclesiastes was written at the end of his life. And then I think Solomon actually, copped on at the very end, but a lot of water over the dam, as I say, from that. So,
But at least God's still there. It's just
well,
waiting for him
sure,
to-
yeah. So,
It's a good example though for us to never think we've got this,
mhm.
that, very
Yeah.
easily something can creep into your life that will
Yeah.
make you far from God.
Yeah.
It's
And
a
it
road.
just goes to the verse in 1 Corinthians 10 and 12 that says, if a man thinks he stands, let him take heed lest he fall. You know, and, you know, I remember in my early Christian career, you know, going, having a thought one time, I went, you know what God's done in my life? He's taken away the desire to sin. Bang. You know, I mean, you know, within 24 hours, my head went somewhere where it shouldn't have gone, and I did something that I shouldn't have done. You know, and so, but that's because you think you've arrived. You know, and Solomon probably thought he arrived. You know, it's like, look at all this, you know, look how God's blessed me. Look how what's going on and stuff and things. But, you know, in the background, he's going, we're going to have to keep this going. You know, so, you know, God blessed him with things and blessed him with wisdom and blessed him with understanding. And then he's going, hey, but I want more. You know, wasn't content with what God had for him. So,
God's blessed us with that knowledge of the, you know, in the Bible.
yeah, sure, and that's exactly what it's there for. If you read in the New Testament, it says things in the Old Testament happen for our learning.
You know, something like if you have a bad upbringing and then someone give you a set of instructions.
Yeah.
Of what to do, yes, you'd have the wisdom, but you wouldn't have really the perception to not like to ignore everything that's happened in the past. Like
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very
See,
programmed.
things get sewn into our spirits and beings and so on, and becomes very much part of our fabric, you know. And so sitting with guys as I do, coming from sort of, you know, more acute kind of problematic backgrounds, you know, when you just say to them, well, you need to stop what you're doing or whatever and get on with it and be a good boy. Yeah, I want to be a good boy, but I just go back to old things, you know. And I was sitting with a fellow the other day, and we were talking about John 15, where Jesus says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Any branch in me that does not bear fruit, he lifts away or cuts away or takes away. And any branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it might bear more fruit." So we talked through that verse where it says, if any branch in me, and Christ says very particularly in me. So this is a branch that is part of himself, but it is a branch that is hanging somewhere where it's not bearing fruit. So the word that's used there is to lift up or to lift away. And so this branch needs to be, you know, hoisted up so that it's in the sunlight, it's cleaned up and doing what it's supposed to be doing. Because God the Father, who is the vine dresser, he does not just want to arbitrarily cut things off and just go, well, that's a waste of space, so we'll just cut it off. There is life there. You know, the life of the vine is in this branch. So therefore, it has potential. It needs to be put somewhere else. So, but the problem is if you take a branch from some sort of a bush, say it's your, you know, have the branches hanging down here and you want it to be up like this. Well, do you just take it and stick it up there? What happens when you take a branch and lift it up and then you let it go? It falls back down to the exact same spot where it was. Why? Because that's how it's growing, you know. So, but if you take this branch and then you take twine and you hold it up there and leave it tied up there for a long time, it will eventually acquiesce to that space, and then you take the twine off and it will be hanging up there. So God does the same thing. God, you know, says, look, you're hanging in a wrong way. You're in a wrong spot. You're gonna be resistant to moving and going to a different place, which is a better place. But because of how you are, you want to go whack, you know. So God has to tie you up and put you in a different space, and then you can bear fruit. So yeah. So now the other branches that are bearing fruit, God's saying, you're doing good things, but you're not doing the best things. So we'll have to cut some stuff out of your life so that you do more fruit. You know, so there's always a tending process. And so, you know, God the Father is, and in his mercy, is looking at his plant going, what can I do to maximize fruit? So now, if you were a plant bearing fruit is not really what you'd want to do, because there's no give back with fruit. You know, when you know, fruit for a plant is a very resource intensive exercise, and you know, drains resources from the plant. So the plant, if it had its own way of things, would say, see this whole fruit business stuff, I'm producing leaves, because leaves are big solar panels. And so when the sunlight hits a leaf, if you're ever in chemistry or biology in high school and you looked at a plant under the microscope, you saw these little round things that were green called chlorophyll. And those things, when light hit it, would start to move. And I've seen this happen. It's really, really neat. And so the light causes the chlorophyll to move, which then generates energy and generates carbon dioxide, which is food for the plant.
So that's photosynthesis.
That's photosynthesis. Yeah.
Well,
So-
I won't tend around that.
Yeah. So the, you know, the plant likes this, you know, because the plant has this big solar panel sitting out in the sunlight going, man, my chlorophyll is just going everywhere. This is great. Woohoo, you know. And so, but if you're producing fruit, there's no feedback from the fruit back into the plant, you know. So, but the plant is designed to do that because that's how it propagates itself, you know, because there's seeds and stuff that grow in it and what have you. So, so, you know, God is saying, look, it's not natural for you to be producing fruit, you know, really, but that's what I want you to do. But that's why you need the life of the vine in you, because if you're separated from the vine, you don't grow, you don't produce fruit, you don't do nothing, you die, you wither. So, anyway, that's a whole big fat discussion, but so, yeah. Right. So his mates here, back to Rehoboam and his buddies, would have had a cushy government positions, and a lack of tax revenue would have meant a potential loss of position. So, but sometimes when we read through the Bible like this and we see, you know, the yoke is heavy and I'm going to scourge you with whips, or, you know, and scourges and all this kind of stuff, we see that very, very, you know, we see it in a certain kind of way. But really what this is about is tax burdens. Okay. So I would say it probably included, because, you know, Solomon did use a lot of forced labor too. You know, so there was a lot of that kind of thing going on as well. Okay, Rehoboam was very insecure, and he acted as a bully because he had no personal security in a relationship with God, and Solomon was not a great example.
So he really wouldn't be well liked.
Huh.
He wouldn't be a well liked king, or wouldn't be respected.
No, and, you know, if he had acquiesced to what Jeroboam and everybody else was saying, it probably would have been better, you know, from a leadership point of view. But what we have to realize is that in verse 15 of chapter 10, it says, so the king didn't listen to the people, for the turn of events was from God. So God was actually behind all this, orchestrating what was going on, because he had said to there was a prophecy given to Jeroboam before he went down to Egypt to say, look, I've torn this garment in 12 pieces, you take 10, but the other 2 are going to stay in Jerusalem, kind of thing. And so basically he was saying, you know, God's going to give you 10 tribes. But it was because under Solomon, there was idolatry. So there was a punishment there. So Jeroboam ended up being the vehicle for the punishment. So, but he was still a bad pill. So, okay. So these next couple of slides is information I've gleaned out of this particular Bible here, which is called the Maxwell Leadership Bible. And there's just some really good notes in here about leadership stuff. And so, so I've kind of rehashed it up on the screen. And because I think sometimes you could look at the likes of Rehoboam and go, you know what, there's nothing to learn here. A guy's a bad pill, he's a screw up, so yeah, let's get past it, and that is a common attitude, with Bible reading. It's like, oh, well, sure, well, that was, never mind, next page, but there are things to learn from this so that in our own life, and this is where application comes in, that we can, put into action, if we're, have influence, because leadership is influence. So we have leadership roles within family, we have leadership roles within work, we have leadership roles within church, we have leadership roles, all of us at some level or another are leaders. Because if we have influence over somebody, we're leading. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. So anyway, so the thing that Rehoboam needed to take on board was this idea of having a good inner circle of people that would advise him, because he was, even though he wasn't young, he was inexperienced. Yeah, I would say he was probably one of these guys that Solomon had given a job within the government and says, here, you sit there, mind yourself, be a good little boy, and you'll get lots of things, as long as you don't kick up or do something silly, And so he really wasn't mentored. He really wasn't given any, responsibility training as such. It was like, here, we'll give you $100 grand a year. You sit there and go and play video games with your mates. Take long lunches if you want, whatever, doesn't matter, And so you end up being a spoiled brat, and that's what it was. So,
what's the point of having new people around you if you haven't got the wisdom to listen to them?
well, this is the problem, So what we can learn here is if you have this proper inner circle of people that you listen to, that God has raised up for you, because God gave Rehoboam older people. Now he did go to them and say, well, what do you advise me? How many times did he say, what do you advise me? And the guy knew that he was inexperienced in a putz, so the people that are in the inner circle here, first of all, need to be experienced people. Don't surround yourself with people that are your peers, or worse, people that don't know anything. I remember, when I was in high school, one of my friends was going out with some girl and then asking me about marriage. It's like, well, I didn't know, but you're standing there thinking you know something.
Yes.
It's like, well, I guess, then you're blowing off a whole bunch of garbage, and they go, wow, boy, okay, sure. So, people who have been down the road of life and understand it, so you need three sets of friends in your life. You need people that are mentors, people that are experienced, that know more things than you do. Then you need peers, which are people on your same level. And then you need people that you're mentoring.
And that's very true today.
Mhm.
For example, for me, you'll be a Christian who wasn't in the church.
Yeah.
But coming here, I had all of that.
Yeah.
Might be my family, but there were my church
Yes,
family
and
that
so-
gave me all of that.
So God does give it to you.
Yeah.
When you trust him, he will raise up the
Yeah.
right people for you.
Yeah.
For such a
And
time.
you're meant to sit in the council of the godly, not the ungodly, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah.
There's worldly wisdom to it, I like that's,
And when that
it's
happens,
Yeah,
not
sure.
necessarily.
when that happens, you do grow.
Yeah.
But you don't grow until you have that.
Yes, yeah. So,
Otherwise,
when God blessed me early in my Christian life with good, godly men, and good godly women too, so, but, God knew that I needed, good godly stability, so, now, I know my father's listening, but my dad and I would say were more spiritual peers, but the people that would have been more my mentors at the time of getting saved, because my dad and I got saved at the same time, basically. So spiritually, we were on the same level. So I needed people in my life that were more spiritually mature. So there was this guy, Dale, that was a couple of years older than me in the youth group. God blessed me with him. He was a mature guy. I mean, for the age of him, he was mature. And then there was my youth pastor, and then other pastors, but particularly my youth pastor, who sunk so much time into me. And when I was speaking to him a couple of months ago on the phone, it was brilliant, because he's in his 70s now, and I remember when I rang him and says, Jim, it's Woody calling from Ireland. He says, hello. He was all delighted, he's near jumping around on the phone,
So that you have so much respect.
Yeah.
Because he was there for you in your early days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's important to have experienced people around you. Next thing is the people that are in your inner circle need to have a heart for God. So people who place God first and uphold his values. So, I remember again in my early Christian walk, again, God was positioning people in my life to emphasize the importance of walking with him, and that God needed to be number one. And I remember having, a struggle, and I remember saying to one of my friends who was, full on for the Lord, and I said to him, I think you're taking these things a little bit too seriously. And but as soon as I said that, I was like, I'm wrong. So it's important to be in fellowship with again the right people and have the right people surrounding you. So and these people need to have a heart for God. If they have a heart for the world, or have a heart for just good things, a lot of the notes that are in this leadership Bible thing, what John Maxwell does is he actually goes into secular environments and teaches this stuff, but he's gotten every last bit of it out of the Bible. So it works, but oftentimes we go to, if we're in secular employment, we'll be told, well, you need to go to certain seminars, you need to go to certain training and that kind of thing. You go to these things and then you're listening to it going, this is rubbish, so it's nonsense. And so often what the church does is they go, gosh, that's brilliant. Let's bring it into the church. And it ends up being kind of worldly stuff, and Cyrus, had a season where we were toying around with the idea of going down a counseling road and adopting a counseling model, and then essentially throwing a lot of spiritual sugar on top of it, but we came to a crossroad and we went, you know what, God has called us to be pastoral carers and befriending people, because that's what the Lord Jesus Christ did. Christ didn't sit and says, okay, I'll sit here, you sit here, we have boundaries, and we'll, talk about certain things in certain ways. No, I'm not belittling counseling as such, because counseling can be useful. Some of us have experienced counseling and it has been helpful, but at the end of the day, counseling cannot give you life. So only God can give you life. So anyway, but this is where you need wisdom from God, and you need to be surrounded by people that help you negotiate through all this stuff. And then the men or the women in the inner circle have objectivity, meaning that people who see the pros and cons of the issues, they can see things from a balanced perspective. Because I'm sure that the older men that were advising Rehoboam, they were saying, if you lighten the load here, lighten the tax burden, people will be good to you. But you need to speak well with them and all this kind of stuff. Because I think they knew when they saw when Solomon was about, that Solomon was jacking taxes up. you know, and they were going, oh, you know, this is not good, you know, so, you know, they saw both kinds of sides.
So really someone stop relying on God for his, you know, his fruitfulness and
Yeah.
blessings, and he just sort of,
Yeah, he
Yeah.
says, I have a big tax base here.
Yeah.
Boy, let's jack it up here.
yeah,
You know, this is a very liberal kind of mentality, which is tax and spend. So, I want to get down roads of, you know, conservatism, and, you know, kinds of stuff. But you know, it was back then. It's today. It's, you know, so whatever floats your boat. Okay, now the inner circle people have a love for people. These are people who love others and value them more than things. Say, Rehoboam was more into himself and his stuff that he got from dad. So he was not concerned really about the welfare of people, because again, you know, sometimes the parental example, you know, Solomon initially was good, but then basically went into a world of, you know what, doesn't matter about people. I want stuff. So, and it will be at the expense of that. I can, you know, out of 10 guys, 5 of them die, sure, doesn't matter. So now I remember talking to a pastor one time about Solomon, and there was a couple of lines there when he was importing stuff, that he imported apes. Yeah, yeah, but what? Yeah, ape, but it says apes, you know. And now some of the translations say apes and monkeys, but some of the others say it's apes and peacocks. But because the word for monkey and peacock are pretty similar, so apparently so it's hard to sort of know exactly which. But apes is pretty clear. And the discussion in certain circles was that Solomon was training apes to work. So it was nearly like a Planet of the Apes kind of situation. Yeah. No.
Okay.
I think it was people.
So
Artificial intelligence.
so you know, anyway, so you know, Solomon was really sort of, you know, because he was into science, he was into pleasure, he was into astrology, he was into, you know, just all sorts of stuff. Oh well, absolutely,
Yes.
yeah. So but
It tells you somewhere that those person who subject people bought me everything he had studied and.
yeah, you know, and the thing is that God had given that to him, but then he started using it for ulterior purposes, you know. So, so some of the idea is that his household basically didn't have people in it; it had apes, and they were trained to serve. So. Well, it says that he imported apes. Yeah, so the Bible's clear that he imported lots of things, including apes. Yeah, so, but there are some people out there that would actually suggest that, you know, he used apes to do a lot more than just be a nice thing standing there in a cage. So someone's okay. So now complementary gifts. Okay, these are people who bring diverse gifts to the inner circle, to the relationship. So these are people that are, because if you have everybody that thinks alike within your inner circle or has the same sort of gifting, then you don't have diversity, and so you need a range of stuff. I mean, when I look around the room here and on Zoom and such, we're all very, very different people with different ages, different experiences, different backgrounds, different things to offer, you know, and that's good. Yeah, and but there is that common glue that holds us together, and that is the glue of the gospel.
Frequently leaders want people who will tell them what they want to hear, not what they need to hear.
Yeah.
The good leader is someone he listens to what he needs to hear,
Mhm.
whereas the bad leader, someone,
Yeah.
he listens to what he wants to hear.
Yeah, if you look at boards, of corporations and that kind of stuff, like you say, good leaders will put within boards people that have different gifting and different abilities to challenge. But yet other people, presidents of companies, will just line their boards with a bunch of yes people.
Yeah.
And family and all that kind of stuff that really won't rock the boat or challenge anything. It's like, well, that's good. Yeah, whatever you want to do, you're the man. We're behind you. We'll got your back. And all this stuff. So
A classic of that in history is Adolf Hitler.
mhm,
Any general who told him he didn't want to hear, he sacked.
yeah.
But he sacked his best general, who could have won the war from him.
Mhm,
And he put people into position, bad generals into position.
mhm.
That works in all relationships.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
So, and then there's loyalty to the leader. So these are people who truly love and are concerned for the leader. So the leader and his inner circle, these are people that are not out against him. They're for him, but and you obviously don't want to have people that are going to go and undermine you in some way. They need to be committed to your leadership. And this is what happens in churches sometimes. You've got a pastor or leadership within the church, and then you have people in the church that do nothing more than attack it. But they don't want to be seen as the attackers, so they'll go and make snowballs and get somebody else to throw. And
That was such a common sight in the world today.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sad and that's happened to the church.
Yeah. So it is ungodly. It's unconscionable. But anyway, it does happen. And unfortunately, I've been involved in a number of churches on a variety of different levels that will split over the head of a bunch of different silly things. So, but anyway, this is all taken from John Maxwell's leadership. So
It's basically wisdom there, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's wisdom for all of us to.
So now, just to continue on in this vein, so verse 15 of chapter 10 is, sorry, you want to? Yeah, Pelly wants to write these things down. So anyway, this is where I need to.
You're all right now.
Okay, I'm all okay. So anyway, Kelly's your secretary there. So
One of the things is a proverb that says that one of the things the Lord hates is those who sow dissent.
yeah, among brethren.
That's what
Yeah.
happens.
So anyway. But verse 15 says, so the king did not listen to the people. So now I know that verse goes on to say, for the turn of events was from God. Now that's a different discussion, but to stay within this vein of leadership here, one of the things that Rehoboam did not do is he didn't listen. So people who don't listen are people with narrow vision. And, the people promised to serve him if he lightened their load, but he didn't see it. He was only seeing himself. He was only seeing his mates, he was only seeing what he could get out of it. And and oftentimes you don't see it because you don't want to. And then he had very poor decision-making skills. He wavered on what to do about their request and told them to come back later. I said, come back to me after 3 days and we'll have a bit of a chat. Now I can understand that, but really, if he had listened, it would have been, he wouldn't have had to stand around terribly long to go, you know what, I take your point on board here, and I'll have a serious, think about it and get back to you. But to dither around for 3 days, it's like, some judges that, I'll reserve judgment, and then it goes back in his chambers and has a sandwich and a cup of coffee. So,
Do you think was there pride there? Was he too proud to listen, or
was just selfish.
I think he was just selfish. Yeah. So, primarily. But, and, you know.
But then it was Solomon created the monster, and then, you know, it was.
Well, yes, that's right.
So,
So, if Solomon had finished well and done what he was supposed to do, I think Rehoboam would have seen that and seen, okay, following God is a legitimate thing because my dad's hung in there.
because our father was a good example, we gave a good example to the kids and
Yeah.
so forth.
So he had a self-centered focus. He rejected wise counsel after deciding it didn't match his desires. Because, he knew that, his mates and all that kind of stuff would probably be losing influence or losing position or something like this because the tax base would have been, the revenue would have been going down. And so there would have been budget cuts and all that sort of stuff. So, it all kicked him in the shins eventually because when Shishak, the king of Egypt, came and was set to go and destroy Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff, he goes, well, hang on here, let me get my dad's gold shields and I'll give them to you. That'll keep you happy. So it's just
My eyes cannot help but jump down to the next chapter, where he assembled the house of Judah, 180,000 chosen warriors. I said he thought, well, I enforced my will on these people.
Yeah. So
I forced on to it.
yeah. So yeah. Again, insecure bully mentality. So and then he had a demanding and impatient style. So he promised to make life tougher, not easier for his people. And that just goes to show what you were saying there about the next chapter. So so again, these are notes from. So, but if you don't listen, this is what you end up with. So, in my work, listening is a very, very important thing. Because if I go in and ramrod, my opinion down somebody's throat, they're not going to want me back the next week. So now, not that what they're saying is completely accurate or completely right or whatever, but you're listening. So, when Christ asked questions, did he cut people off? No, he let people speak. I think about the man by the pool of Bethesda in John 5. Where, Jesus finds this man who's been in this condition for 38 years, next to the pool. And the fact was at the pool that an angel came down at a certain time or at some point stirred the water, and whoever was the first one to step in got healed of whatever disease they had. So obviously it was a big attraction. So a lot of people hanging out waiting for the moving of the waters, as the Bible says. So, and then Jesus spies this man who's been there for 38 years. Now you'd think after 38 years, you'd be able to figure out how to be the first one into the boat. After that much observation. But after a while, you go, actually, not too bad just lying here, because I can just glance up to so-and-so and get, give a share, any chance, could you help me fill this form in so I can get more money out of the group? And all that kind of mentality, so a lot of people then get stuck. And so then Jesus says to the guy, do you want to be made whole? So in a more modern translation is, do you want to get better? So Jesus is actually meeting with him on his level and asks him this question. Now, sometimes when Jesus asks people about, do you want to be whole? He is saying, do you want to be spiritually whole and physically whole and holistically whole? But this particular question is, you're down here. Do you actually physically want to get out of this? And so what the man says is, well, sir, I have no man to put me into the pool. And when I start coming down, somebody gets in before me. So he goes and, has this big, long discussion, but Jesus doesn't cut him off at the knees. He doesn't go, look, bud, see you're a waffle. It's garbage. So stop it. No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't do that. He lets the man talk. So, and then Jesus goes and says, take up the bed and walk. You know, so then there's a big see-ho because it all happens on the Sabbath, you know, and then people are giving him gyp because it's like, you know, it's not lawful to carry your bed around under your arm.
Just wait and
Yeah. And, you know, some of that stuff is the most embarrassing scripture to read.
That he didn't know who Jesus was then, but he later meets Jesus in the temple
Yes.
and then recognizes him.
But, you know, and the thing is that the man does two very important things
Yes.
when when he is found at the temple, because Jesus finds him there.
Yeah.
He's not at the pool.
Yeah.
So he's changed his social demographic.
Yes.
So he has changed his friends,
Yeah.
and he has changed his location.
Yes.
So he's going to the right place to hear the word of God, because where was he found? He was found at the temple. So, and he was found at the temple with people that could share the word of God with him and be his friend. You know, because back, you know, it's like people that stop drinking and then they go back to the pub. It's like, you know, well, I want to have a witness with my friends and stuff, and I'll drink a Coke or an orange. No, that wrong answer, bad news. You know, because you know why people go to pubs? To drink. That's why they go there. To drink. You know, anybody that I've ever spoken to that has gone back to go and drink a Coke or have an orange and have a bit of a chat and that kind of thing, you know what they eventually do? Drink. You know, nearly 100% of the time. So, and I know sort of well-meaning people that, you know, have gotten saved or something like this, and then they, you know, go, well, I want to have a witness with my old friends, but they don't want to hear about God. They're there to drink. So go live the life that God wants you to live, and your people will see when you're somewhere else going, well, fair play to him. He's actually doing it right.
Yeah.
So, you know, but if you're back in the stew. So let's just finish this off here. Whoops. This is what.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, either way, you know, go to the development and things like that there, it's still a pub, isn't it? Like, you know, there's alcohol, so.
Yes, this is a fuzzy line
You know,
of
you know what I mean?
Yeah, when you go into the bar for a snack at 1 o'clock in the day.
yeah.
No matter where you go to now.
Yeah,
There's a bar.
I mean, you know,
because there used to be places where there was no alcohol,
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
like a bigger step in the more, you know.
Oh, yes, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not there now.
I would say that there are very, very few dry restaurants.
Yeah,
You know, most of them are licensed premises.
But you're not saying that.
Like I used to go with it,
Yeah.
I used to go to the bus bar, but I didn't drink.
Yeah.
I would have played pool with big mate I worked in the police station.
Mhm.
And to me, I didn't think it was right for me to go into that place
Mhm.
to play pool.
Yeah.
And I would have went up the downshire and had a big quiz, you know.
Yeah, you know, when you're sitting in those environments and you know, I think it's some of it is an issue of conscience, you know, where you know.
You know,
I mean, I
would go to the downshire for my birthday or something like that there. Is that wrong?
No,
No, that's not.
It's for food.
No, it's only for food, you're not having.
You know,
You know, there, you know, in those establishments, you know, there's the bar and then there's the restaurant. You know, now I know they serve drink in the restaurant,
Yeah,
but you know, the bar generally tends to be more associated with
Food.
drinking than the restaurant. You know, but
the
you know,
restaurant was very
you could end up then saying, okay, well, I'm not going to go to Tesco's.
Yes.
You know, because
That's
there's,
right,
because
because
there's an off license
Yeah.
in Tesco's. You know, but
And little street.
well, sure.
That's when you try to get religion in your life.
Well, yes, you can you know. You know, you could get ridiculous
Yes.
to the point where, well, I'm not going to walk down the street in Banbridge because I might run into somebody who sins. Well, okay, you want to go and get off the planet, you know, and yeah, so, you know, it can get silly, you know, and so, but I think you know, you need to say, now, I wouldn't go into a bar. and sit at a bar
Yeah.
because of the work that I do. That would look bad, even though I would be going in there maybe just to go and, something, and, to get a meal or to sit and talk to somebody or something, I have to watch that,
You never felt you needed to drink afterward.
yeah, so,
That's been something. See,
yeah, so, people seeing me coming out of a bar would go, oh, I did on.
Yeah.
So, but, and it's, other sorts of situations too, like, I wouldn't, go into a woman's house if she's on her own.
Yeah.
That's just,
That's right.
stand at the door or something like this, or have somebody else with me,
Sure.
so, any of the leadership in the church, if they're going around to see people, they're careful about that kind of thing.
Is there not women people who works in stores to go and talk to?
Oh, yeah,
women?
sure,
Yeah.
So, so you're putting into place, safety measures so that, things are okay. I've sat with women before in terms of counsel, doing pastoral care with them and that kind of stuff, but I've sat with them in controlled environments. Now the two of us may be sitting in a room together, but there's a window in the door.
Yes.
And there's secretaries and there's people about and stuff and whatever. So, and I've had people say, oh, well, sure, can't you just come down to the house?
They don't realize.
No, people in the world don't get that, they don't see a big issue with that.
See, in every school in Northern Ireland, the old solid doors have to be taken out and the window have to be put in the door
Mhm.
to protect the teacher under child protection
Yeah.
legislation.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
you could
that
be-
would be quite sad.
Yes, but that you could be upset, but it was a safety measure for the teacher too.
Mhm. So,
So it was.
but we'll just do this last slide. And again, this is one of these things where I forgot to put the things come down one at a time. But anyway, so, but basically, God was in control of the situation and allowed the division of the nation because it was a judgment on Israel for idolatry in Solomon's reign. So, so this is why that was allowed to take place, because you do run into these statements in Chronicles in particular, where God and his sovereignty is mentioned, because it says, and he didn't listen to the people because the turn of events was of God. So now we may look at that and go, you know what? I don't get that. Why would God want a nation divided? His own people divided. Why would he want that? I don't understand. I don't understand either, to be quite honest, but that was God's will. But then the second thing was God was always going to maintain a witness in Jerusalem for the sake of David via Judah, because Christ would come through Judah. So there was all,
He had a plan, he's
Yeah.
seen ahead.
yeah.
They didn't-
Yeah, so, but all these things happen basically because of judgment for sin. If Jeroboam and Solomon sort of, had their stuff together and were following God properly, you wouldn't have had these issues.
Yes. Just have it. Go with God, just.
Yeah.
Why would you?
But so Rehoboam was a very weak leader, had no spiritual depth. I mean, you really, in the next couple of chapters, which we'll go through next week, you just read time and time again that Rehoboam just says, he rejected the Lord, he rejected the law, rejected, so. Sure, yeah,
And how much the people were confident.
yeah.
Have a king.
Yeah. And especially after the likes of Solomon, which was such a, in a lot of ways, a hard act to follow, so, but that's what happens with, a political dearth there, so. And then the application of Rehoboam to us then is in learning from his bad leadership example, okay? He didn't listen to the right people. We need to listen to the right people. So, if you're in positions of authority, And again, every one of us, if we're minding kids or we're, grandfather or, in work or in school or whatever the case is, we all have some kind of influence somewhere. So, God help us to learn to listen to the right people so that we can pass that on then as a good example.
And you need a bit of discernment.
Yeah.
For people who give out wisdom, because there's plenty of people who are, I've got a lot of friends that are older.
Yeah.
And some of them are Christian, but you can nearly discern sometimes that they haven't got all the, that they may haven't really applied the things that they've said and find out whether they're right or not.
Yeah.
I'm not certain.
That's right. And just because somebody's a Christian doesn't make them an authority in all things.
Very much so.
So because there's a lot of Christians out there that are very, very immature, and actually they don't want to grow because it means responsibility.
And it could be 80 years old.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's the-
And there's a lot of 80-year-old, 1-year-old Christians,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
and they're just little babies. I remember my friend Jimmy over in America, he learned that a young person in Christ was a babe in Christ. That was the language that he heard. And so, but when he heard that phrase, he thought that was a good looking Christian girl. Honestly, that's what he thought,
That's funny.
So,
And he wasn't ashamed to tell you that?
no, Jimmy, there's no back doors to Jimmy, but Jimmy grew in the Lord. I had the privilege of mentoring him and praying with him at 5:30 in the morning before he went to work for about a half an hour, and got well established in the things of the Lord, and see that guy go on. Still, him and his wife are going on well, kids and grandkids, but they were 17 years on the heroin. So,
Was he the one that said about you and Magdalene?
Yep.
Ah, with him.